Welcome to MyLife, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg, Olav Hashalom, and Rabbi Moshe Pinchas Akoyan Katz, Olav Hashalom. It is also l'schus and the merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel and Risha Katz, L'erich Yomim V'shanim Tevis, for many long, healthy years. We are in the middle of chapter 2 of Tanya, the fascinating discussion of understanding the very nature of your soul, of a neshama, of the nefesh elikis, the divine soul, with a comparison to a child and its parent. A child and a parent are not just two entities, like a teacher and a student. Two separate entities, and the teacher communicates knowledge. There's a deep connection between teacher and student. But the student is not made up of the very genetic material and the genetic code of the teacher, whereas a child is. A child comes from the very genetic structure of its parents. Here specifically of its father, the seed of the father, which carries in it the life force and all the DNA and genes that will shape and define the child. So though the child will be a separate entity, however, what defines this entity? What is its building blocks? It's the parent. This the Alter Rebbe is using both to explain that intricate and intimate connection between Bonim Atem L'Hashem Elokechem, that you are God's children, and as such come from the very Moyach Ha'av, the mind of the Father, in this case the mind of the Father, Avinu Shebashamayim, Machshavte and Chochmosei Yisbarach, which is Chochmei Elah, Nimshach B'Moyach Ha'elyon Shi Chochmei Elah Kavyachol. But he's also explaining it in the context of what we're learning now, later in the chapter 2, which is to explain that even though souls are diverse from one end of the spectrum to the other, the highest and greatest souls like Moshe Rabbeinu and the others, and then souls that are far lower level, all souls, how do you explain that? They all come from one place, from the Moyach Ha'av, Chelik Elekam Emal Mamish. So the child explanation, the mashal, the example of the child, works perfectly to explain this as well. Because from one tipa Moyach Ha'av, as we learned last week, when a child is born, every part of the child comes from the genetic material and the DNA of the father's seed. Everything came. So it doesn't matter whether it's the brain, the heart, all the other parts, all the way down to the toenails, the tzipernayim. So there are clear distinctions in the child. You can't compare one organ and one limb to another. You can't compare the toenails to the mind, and yet they all come from that seed, from that cell, from that concentrated initial seed of the fathers. How does it happen? That's the development, that it fertilizes the mother's egg, and 9 months, as he said, of gestation, of pregnancy, through a 9-month gestation of the mother's womb, al di'eshiyasa tish chadasha bebetaneim, v'yardim emadregel emadregel yishtanus u'lisavas v'menu tzipernayim. So that energy, that cell, splits and continues to develop through pregnancy to the point that the full child develops all the way down to the nails, and that's how you have the details. But they all originate from the same seed. So therefore, in the example, we see that even though there's distinctions in souls, we'll soon get back to the nimshal, the moral, but we see there's distinctions and yet they're all connected to the core seed. You can't say that the nails have less of the seed than the brain itself has. It's like saying the DNA is less in one part of the body than another part. So even though now it's split into different parts, which is what defines a human being, the child is made up of many parts, and in this case we're talking from the extreme, from the mind of the child till the tzipor, the toenails. Then he continues, V'kim kol zeh, that even though it's now come down level by level, like he said, in the mother's womb, progressively transformed to the point that the child's nails are also formed from that tipa. So he continues, V'im kol zeh, eidenek shudim yechedes beyichud nifla, v'otzum b'mehusa v'atzmus harishon. Nevertheless, even in the nails, the very seminal seed has only changed in its form of manifestation. In other words, the DNA in the brain is a brain. The DNA and the genetic material in the nails is in the form of nails. But that's only it's an expression. But in terms of its very core, it remains bound and unified. That's what he says, Eidenek shuru miyuchedes, in a wondrous and powerful unity. Biyichud nifla v'otzum. Because it's all fundamentally connected to the very genetic material of the parent, of the father. So it's bound and unified in a wondrous and powerful unity with its original core essence. B'mehusa v'atzmus harishon. Shahiyasa tipas moyach ha'av. As it existed in that seminal drop in the semen, in the seed, that was rooted, as we discussed, not physically but spiritually, in the father's mind, in the father's brain. So when you look at a child, you don't say a part of the child comes from the father and a part doesn't, or a part is more from the father than another, just like when we talk about the life force. So even though there's a major distinction between the vital organs, the brain, the mind, the heart, other organs, and let's say the toenail, especially the toenail, life is not dependent on a toenail. Other parts of the vital organs, the life is dependent. Yet when we say a person is alive, you don't say we're alive, only one part of us is alive. The whole person, from head to toe, is alive. In that itself, that's called the chayes kloli, that you're alive. And that life touches every aspect of the body from beginning, from the top, the highest, to the lowest level, down to the heel, down to the toenails. Yet chayes prati, when you talk about the specific vitality of each limb and organ and each body part, there are distinctions. More begili, less begili. More revealed, less revealed. More vital for the life force itself, and some are less vital. Obviously, a complete person, you want every part of the body, but there are definitely parts that, God forbid, due to whatever disease or an accident, a person can live without them. That doesn't mean that the life force is less there, it just means that its manifestation is in a different form. So you have here an example, perfect example of diversity and many different levels. You can't compare a toenail on the foot to the brain as far as the organ, the vital organ part, but you can compare the life force. And all that life force came from the tipas moyach ha'av. We'll soon discuss what it is in the nimshal, but we know already that moyach ha'av is avinu shebashamayim. Chachmasi is baruch, where the neshama is rooted in even higher than God's mind, but it travels through God's mind and unified. God is unified with His chuva chachmasi echad, and that will travel down to the neshamas as they branch off, each in their own respective way. But then he adds something more now. And the Alter Rebbe, in his thoroughness, you see how he doesn't leave any stone unturned. He continues, because now you can still ask yourself a question. Fine, you're saying it all originated, but it changed form and shape. It's true, it all originates from the seed, from the tipas moyach ha'av, and the tipa that has now become the root of the life force of the very being of the child, not just the life force, the very body of the child, is all connected intricately with the original tipa, the tipa's moyach ha'av. But the question now is, but it has taken on a different shape. Now it's like a toenail. Tzipernayim. It's no longer like the mind itself. So you could say, 1 second, it's still rooted there, but it's no longer moyach material, you can say, mind material. The DNA is there, the genetic material is there, but it's not in the form of a mind, it's in the form of a toenail. Says the Alter Rebbe. V'gam achshav. And also now. And even now. Meaning after the child is born. Not just when the child was conceived by the seed. Tipus moyachav. But even now, in the child, beben yenikas hatzipernayim v'chayusam nimshaches ma'amoyach shabaresh. The nails draw their spiritual nourishment and energy from the brain, the mind, in the child's head. The focus here, we have to say that he's talking here, moyach shabarosh, not the moyach of the father. Because the tippa now has already become a child. But he's connecting now that even the child's nails and every part of the child is still connected to its moyach, to the moyach of the child. And through the moyach, the mind of the child is going to be connected to the father's mind. So this is an additional point. Because you could say, okay, it originated in the moyach ha'av, in the mind of the father. But now it's become a toenail. No, but the toenail is still connected to the mind of the child, which is rooted in the mind of the father. That's one of the explanations in how we learn this piece in Tanya. So this now adds another dimension, that the moyach still plays a role even when the child has become a separate entity. So in addition from the entire child coming from the tipus moyachav of the father, of the seed of the father, once it takes shape in all the details of the child, it's still connected to the moyach, to the central nervous system, and to the very driving force of the mind. And as we already learned from Torah Ed, we're not talking here about the physical brain, we're talking about the brain's power, its spiritual power over the entire body. Okay. Now comes the next piece. And it's critical to first clarify here. Even though the next section that we're going to read now in Tanya sounds like it's following V'gam achshav beben yenikas hatzipernayim v'chiyusim mishachas ma'amoyach shabarosh. Explains the Rebbe in his commentary on Tanya that this Gemara that he's going to quote now actually is going back to the original point. Not that in the child the nails are connected to the mind, but that it all originates from the father. Remember, the nimshal is critical to remember. The father and son the father is the divine creator, the source, and the son is the neshama. But the neshama has many levels, and it all comes from one tipus mayachav. So now he brings a raya from the Gemara Kedi Isa beGemara Nida Sham. As the Talmud states in Nida, Sham, page 31a. Leuven shememenu gidim v'atzomis v'tzirpanayim. Leuven, the white of the seed of the father, from which tendons, bones, and nails are formed. So the Gemara Nida talks about what shapes a child. Talks about what the father contributes, what we just said, the white tendons, bones, and nails. And the mother talks about what the mother contributes, which is not being cited here. Not discussing that. Though he spoke about the mother and the womb, but there's no question that part of a child also receives genetic material from the mother. So the oidem, the red of the blood of the mother, also gives the blood and other things that the Gemara spells out that comes from the mother. But here the focus is on the muscle of the father. So what do you see from this? You see what he said before, that Sipernayim, even though they're just nails, they come from the white of the seed. So clearly he's referring back that comes from Tipus Me'echav. The statement that came in between was already applying another dimension, that also But the ben, Yenikas Atzamnaim, is from the Moyach Shebarosh. This is the most likely and the simplest way to explain it. Some try to explain, but it's bedeichik, says the Rebbe, that this also refers to the connection of the nails to the Moyach HaBen. But Bapashtas, the Gemara is talking about Moyach HaAv, not the Moyach HaBen. Even though, as I said, you could somewhat force it, but it's bedeichik. And then the Alter Rebbe in his thoroughness continues. This is not just a physical thing based on the Gemara, but it also has an element that we see in Kabbalah. In the brackets, he says, "U'kamoshe koser be'etz chaim, shar hachashmal." In Eitz Chaim, there's a gate, a section called Shar hachashmal, which is in the Eitz Chaim that we have in our editions, 41:1. He says the following: "B'seid levushim shel adam arishin began Eden." So he's concerning the secret of Adam's clothing in Gan Eden. Remember, before Chet Tzadas, it says that they were arumim. Adam and Chava were naked, but they still had a skin. So the Eitz Chaim says that this skin, which in Medrash it says Shahayut Tzipernayim, the Medrash says that their skin was like not clothing that's detached. It was like nails. An example like nails. They were covered like nails. They were part of the very body of Adam and Chava, but they were like nails. So he says in Eitz Chaim, this is from Pirkei Rabbi Elazar, chapter 14, that their clothing was like nails. So we see Tzipor Naim here. So the Eitz Chaim says these nails come from a B'chinas Moyach Tfuna. They're nourished from the mental energy of Tfuna. Tfuna is a level in Bina. There's Chachma, Bina. In Bina, the level of Tfuna, which is the root from where these nails come from. So the Alter Rebbe is bringing up proof that it's not just what the Gemara says, but also on a deeper spiritual level, nails, even the lowly nails, so to speak, the nails, the toenails of a human being, are rooted in a very high level, in this case, Moyach Tfuna. Now, this is not the toenails. This is the nails referring to the nails, but you see nails, which are such an external component, still are rooted in a high level. So we have now, both from the Gemara and Masechta Nida and the Eitz Chaim, the connection even with nails with all the way back to the Moyach Ha'av. So or the Chochma, or in this case Tfuna. Now we go back to the Nimshol, the moral. All this was an example that we all can identify with. You can study a child and you see exactly all this. A newborn child is a fully developed child, but if you go back to the moment of conception, it all is encompassed in the life energy within the seed. You're not going to see nails there, you're not going to see a mind there, but it's all rooted there. And then throughout pregnancy, it develops, the fetus develops till you have a full-blown child. So now let's apply it to the Nimshol. The Eibishter, the way he created neshamas, like we spoke earlier, he did it the same way. As a matter of fact, the way he created human beings, that a child is developed from the genetic material and DNA and the seed of the father, is actually mirrors the way it is Lamaila. But we understand it, Mamata Lamaila, we understand it from the example, and now let's apply it. So he says, V'kocha mamish kavyochel, exactly like this, mirroring this precisely, he says kocha mamish. But he says kavyochel. It seems like mamish and kavyochel would be a contradiction. If it's literally, then it's not so to speak. So kocha mamish means it's literally like the moshel, but obviously it's figurative because lamaila, you can't speak in physical terms. You can't speak physical nails or physical mind or physical seed. So the moshel is a perfect example, but on a different plane. So he says, "V'kocha mamash kavyochel b'sheirish kol hanefesh ruach neshama shel klolos Yisrael l'mayla." That exactly like we just described, the child's body, the child's being, is made up of different parts, and it's all rooted. So he says the same thing is nefesh ruach neshama. Remember, he explained that we have nefesh ruach neshama, and each one encompasses the other. So in other words, all the different details of the souls. Nefesh is one level, ruach is another level, neshama is another level. In that itself, you have greater souls, you have lower souls. All the diversity he spoke about before, the tens of thousands of levels, are all there. So he's saying the same thing, that this is, so this exact kocha mamash kavyochel, b'sheidish kol hanefesh ruach neshama shel kol Yisrael l'mayla, in the supernal root of the nefesh, ruach, and neshama of all Israel. Remember, nefesh is the behavioral, the biological part of the soul. Ruach is the emotional. Neshama is the cognitive. Nihi chagas chabad, as we go. So all that, the shadish, the root of it all, where did it root? Remember where it rooted? It was rooted in chelik elikam and mal mamish, but as it manifested in chachmasei yizbarach. Like he said, memoyecha elyon shi chachmei elah. So it's rooted there. Now he says, okay, that's like the root in the seed, good. But now it then evolved, just like the child doesn't remain in the seed. The seed will now develop in the gestation stages of pregnancy. So what is the equivalent in the nimshal? So he says, "Biridasim madrega lemadrega, al yedei ishtalshus ha'elemus, atzilas bri yitzira v'asiyah mechachmasi yizbarach." As these souls now descended, rung by rung, level by level, from God's wisdom, the brain of the Father, the mind of the Father, chachmasei yizbarach, hu v'chachmasei echad, which we discussed at length, how God and His mind and His intellect is one. Now it's evolving through the chain, Seder Ishtalshlus, it's called. Ishtalshlus is like from the word shalshelis, like a chain of links. Through the chain of the which worlds? The great known, famous four spiritual worlds, Bria, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. I'll explain in a moment what those four worlds are. But let's consider it. Kediksiv kulam b'chachma sisa. As the first states, you made them all with wisdom. And b'pashtus, meaning that right now we're discussing how everything comes from chachma. Kulam b'chachma sisa. It all originates from chachma. In the Hagah earlier, kulam b'chachma sisa, he was talking about how chachma is l'mayla matzilus is only considered like asiya. Here the focus is the opposite, on that all of it originates in chachma. Because remember, in this whole process, it begins with the stages that are higher than all structure. Then the divine chose to manifest through structure, through chachma. Chachma in turn evolves to all the different souls through Atzilus Bri Yitzir Asiya. So it all originates kulam b'chachma sisa in chachma. That chachma in turn creates all of existence, and this shtalshus of Atzilus Bri Yitzir Asiya, the four worlds, is how the soul ultimately manifests in all the different distinctions. She'll have neshamas from Atzilus and neshamas from Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. Briefly, the four worlds are four spiritual dimensions. They're four spiritual states. Atzilus comes from the word emanation or imparting. Vayetzel min haruach, meaning it's not a creation entirely. It's like imparting from the ruach, the spirit of Moshe, imparted in Parsha Ba'alescha to the Skenim. Bria is already the world of creation. Yetzira is formation. It gives it shape and form. And Asiya, the world of action. Basically, but briefly, there are four steps in any process of creation. First, you begin with a vision that's connected very much to the essence of the one who has the vision. That's Atzilus. A world of unity, a world of emanation, a world of imparting the divine structure of existence. Bria is the outline. You create an outline like a skeleton. Yitzira gives it shape and form, and Asiya is the final product. Here we're talking obviously in spiritual worlds. So the way the Eibishter created the world is very much parallels how a child develops. It all begins with one cell. One cell, fertilized egg by a seed. There, everything is concentrated. And then through 9 months, every stage, the fetus develops. That's an example. It starts with one vision that becomes one cell, one fertilized egg by a seed. That then develops into a full-blown child. As a matter of fact, in Chassidus it talks about that each of the 9 of the months of pregnancy, each one is another stage of development through the 10 spheres. Here he's talking about it like in the context of the spheres. So of course the Eibishter could have done it with one shot, but he wanted it to have a structure. He wanted souls to be different. He wanted diversity. But he wanted the diversity to all reflect one source. So it all begins in Chachmah, Hu v'Chachma she'echad in Atzilus, as we learned earlier. Then it manifests and spreads, you can say branches out, through the 4 worlds of Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah. And from that, Nishavu Mimenu. He continues now. And Nishavu Mimenu, the result of this whole of evolution of steps, through that is Nisava, through the 4 worlds. From the Chachmah, so he says Nisava Mimenu, Nefesh Ruach Neshama Shel Amei Haaretz B'chusei Erech. The Nefesh Ruach and Neshama of everyone, but specifically he's right away going now to the example is Tzipar Naim. We were talking with the toenails, the lowest level, so to speak, in the human body, with the least amount of vitality and revealed energy, and yet it's all coming from that original place of this. So even of the Nefesh Ruach Neshama of the simple folk and common people, which are compared to the nails here. Earlier he compared it to the akvayim, which is the heel. They're all formed. V'im kol zeh, eiden eksurus miyichadus biyichud nifle v'atzim b'mehusan v'atzmusan arishan. She hamshach is chachmei elah. Exactly the same words he used in the example. That though it's now evolved to the point it's a toenail, you don't see the revealed energy as you do see in the brain, but it's still made of the same DNA, the same genetic divine DNA. So he says, nevertheless, like it is with the child, the biological child in the mushal, these souls still remain bound with a wondrous and awesome unity. The same words. B'yichud nifle v'atzum, with their original ascension source, which is what? In the nimshal, which is a direct emanation of supernal wisdom. Chachmei elah. So there you have the mushal and the nimshal. We still have to discuss that second part, which is that even when the child becomes a child, it's still, all parts are connected to the moyach shabarash of the child. And that will leave for the next shir. These archived classes can be seen at TanyaApply.com. You can also submit any question. A good tavach, everyone be healthy and well. Kol tuv.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChassidusApply.com for archived classes and more resources.